When I was about 7, my parents started taking my younger sister and me to a new church. Back then, we lived in Charleston, West Virginia, but we had to move after my dad lost his construction job, probably because of his drinking. For about a week after he got fired, my parents were constantly arguing. They were at their wits' end trying to figure out how to keep the family afloat, especially with my mom pregnant and due to have my little brother in just a month or so. Then one day, my dad walked in and announced that we needed to move. He claimed he had the solution to all our problems. We packed up everything and left for a small town called Clay, smack dab in the middle of West Virginia. It was a world away from what we were used to. West Virginia is full of small, sleepy towns with country folk who are either as friendly as can be or downright cold to outsiders. Clay fell firmly into the second category. Moving from Charleston, a place that, with its 40,000 residents, felt like a bustling city by West Virginia standards, to this remote, tiny town was a shock. I'll never forget the car ride there. My dad had this huge grin plastered across his face, like he couldn't wait to unveil our new life. My mom seemed less on edge than when he first brought up the move, so I figured they must have had a long talk the night before. What I didn't know was that we weren't moving to a regular house or apartment in Clay. Oh no, this was something entirely different. As we drove up to the massive, fenced-in area, my sister and I exchanged confused looks. "What is this place?" I asked, staring at the imposing structure. "Tim, this isn't what you described last night," my mom said, her tone uneasy. "I know it looks a little different, Susan," my dad said with a forced chuckle. "But trust me. I checked this place out. You're gonna love it once you see the inside." At the gate stood a man with a rifle. Now, I know most people would have been alarmed, but in this part of the state, it wasn't unusual to see someone walking around town with a shotgun or a rifle slung over their shoulder. The man leaned down to our car window, and my dad told him to let Father Williams know that the Randall family had arrived. The man nodded, radioed someone, and opened the gate for us. The moment we drove in, it felt like we'd entered a completely different world. Both sides of the main road were lined with rows of wooden cottages packed closely together. Families were outside having barbecues, laughing, and kids ran around playing games. It looked like some kind of ideal suburban neighborhood, but something about it felt off. My sister and I were cautiously excited, wondering about the other kids and what life here would be like. We finally pulled up to a massive 4-story concrete building. Standing out front was a tall, pale man in white robes and aviator sunglasses. His smile stretched wide, almost unnaturally so, as he opened his arms to greet us. "It's such a joy to meet your lovely family, Tim," the man said as he clasped my father's hand in a firm handshake. "Yes, Father Williams. This is my wife, Lisa, and our kids I was telling you about," my dad stammered. Father Williams turned to my mom, his smile broadening as he pulled her into an overly familiar hug that lingered just a second too long. "Lisa, it's a pleasure to meet you. Tim's told me so much about you." "Well, he's said wonderful things about you too," my mom replied, her southern charm kicking in. "He says you've been a real blessing to him." Father Williams raised his hands as if addressing a congregation. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, and I'm just grateful your husband was willing to accept his grace." Then he turned his attention to me and my sister, crouching down to meet us at eye level. His grin never wavered. "And who are these two gifts from above?" he asked, his voice sickly sweet. "I'm Jason," I said, my words coming out stiff, like I was talking to a drill sergeant. "I'm 7. And you, little miss?" He lightly tapped my sister's nose, his grin stretching wider. "My name's Ellie, and I'm 3, she said, swaying shyly with a giggle. "Well, Jason and Ellie, it's so nice to meet you both. I look forward to getting to know you better," he said before straightening up and turning to my parents. "Welcome, Randall family, to our humble paradise. We call it Canaan." He gestured grandly before continuing. "You'll be staying in cottage 145. It's a cozy little home in one of the cul-de-sacs just off the main road. You'll fit right in." "Thank you, Father," my mom said, her voice soft as her eyes lingered on him. Father Williams smiled again, his expression unreadable. "The pleasure is all mine. Welcome to your new life." "It's my pleasure. Go settle into your new home and welcome to Canaan," Father Williams said, flashing a grin that felt too perfect to be genuine before he turned and disappeared into his giant concrete church. The house we moved into wasn't huge, but it was a decent 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom place with a small kitchen and living room. Compared to our cramped apartment back in Charleston, it felt like a step up. I was thrilled to finally have a room to myself instead of sharing with my little sister, Ellie. Of course, that didn't last long. When my baby brother Caleb was born, I had to share my space again. The neighbors in the compound were friendly, almost unnaturally so. Every day after the sermons led by Father Williams, all the kids would meet at the playground. There were about 120 of us, ranging in age, and we'd play games like tag and hide-and-seek. But there was one game I'd never heard of before, Kill the Sinner. In this game, 3 kids were chosen to be sinners, and the rest of us had to chase them down, drag them to the top of the jungle gym, and make them stand with their arms stretched out like they were on a cross. Then they had to shout, "I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner," before jumping into the sandpit below. The game always ended with laughter, though every now and then someone would break an arm or twist an ankle. Even so, we thought it was fun back then. By the time I was 12, Ellie was 8, and Caleb was 5, life in the compound had become routine. We never left, we didn't need to. My parents spent their days chatting with neighbors, grilling out, and sharing meals. My dad had quit drinking, but he still fit right in, joking and hanging out like nothing had changed. My siblings and I played with the neighbor kids constantly, and for the most part, it felt like a happy, normal childhood. But then Alex, a 6-year-old boy who lived nearby, said something that shook me. Father Williams invited me to play in his room earlier, Alex announced while we were all playing near the jungle gym. "Lucky," Ellie said, clearly jealous. "I wish I could play with Father Williams." "What kind of game did you play?" I asked, already feeling uneasy. Why would a grown man want to play alone with a little kid? "Rock, paper, scissors," Alex replied, matter-of-factly. The loser had to take off a piece of their clothes. I froze. "What?" Alex shrugged. "Yeah, I won a few rounds, but I lost in the end." I didn't know what to say. My brain couldn't make sense of it, but before I could ask anything else, Alex kept talking. After we played, he told me to send my sister in. She must have lost too because she ran out crying. Alex's sister was 14. "I want to play with Father Williams," Ellie said, bouncing a ball without a care in the world. "No," I shouted, my voice echoing across the playground. Everyone went silent, staring at me. I didn't care. I turned and ran straight home, slamming my bedroom door behind me. I told my parents what Alex had said, expecting them to be as horrified as I was. But their reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. Why would that Johnson kid make up something like that? My dad said, scratching his head. I know, my mom added. Alex doesn't seem like the type to tell wild stories. My dad chuckled. Probably gets it from his dad. You know how Zach is with his crazy college stories. They both laughed, and my frustration boiled over. I'm serious. I snapped. My dad waved me off. Austin, he's 6. He's probably just making stuff up for attention. Don't think too much about it. But I started to argue. Go to bed, Austin. It's late, my dad said firmly before walking away with my mom. I stood there, feeling helpless and confused. A few weeks later, after a sermon, my siblings and I were outside talking with some other kids about meeting up at the playground to play Kill the Sinner. That's when Father Williams approached us. Mary, he said, smiling down at Ellie, can I speak with you in my room? Sure, Father Williams. Ellie said eagerly. What do you need to talk to her about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. That's a private matter, Austin. Why don't you and Caleb run along, he said, waving us away. No, that's okay, Father. Caleb and I were thinking about saying some prayers in the hall first, I said quickly. We were? Caleb asked, confused. I jabbed him in the ribs, making him gasp. Yeah, dummy. Come on, let's go, I said, steering him toward the prayer hall, which was conveniently located right next to Father Williams' room. When Father Williams closed the door behind my sister, a wave of helplessness surged through me. I couldn't let this happen. My body moved on its own, fueled by sheer desperation. Caleb, stay here, I said firmly, my voice trembling. Without waiting for his reply, I bolted to the door. I pounded on it with all my might. Father Williams. I shouted, my fists slamming against the heavy wood. The door finally opened a crack, just enough for him to stick his head out. Austin, he said, his tone sharp with annoyance, I told you this is a private conversation. Your sister and I need some time alone. But Father Williams, I stammered, my chest tightening, I really need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please. His eyes narrowed, his face twisting into a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Whatever it is, it can wait. We won't be long. And with that, he slammed the door shut. I felt the tears coming, hot and unrelenting. My fists and feet pounded the door as I screamed, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me and come to help. Let her out. I cried. My voice cracked, and my hands throbbed from the relentless pounding. Caleb appeared beside me, his small face pale with worry. Austin, what's wrong? He asked timidly, tugging at my sleeve. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Just then, the door opened, and my sister stepped out. She moved past us like a ghost, her face blank, her eyes staring straight ahead as if she didn't see us at all. She didn't say a word, didn't even acknowledge we were there. It was like she disappeared into herself, leaving behind an empty shell. Caleb, Father Williams said, his voice smooth and sickeningly cheerful, I think it's your turn now. Would you like to play a little game with me? Caleb's face lit up with a smile, and he opened his mouth to respond, but I acted before he could. I shoved him behind me, planting myself between him and the predator. No, Father, I said, my voice low and trembling. I think I'd like to play instead. Father Williams's grin widened, the corners of his mouth stretching unnaturally. Oh, do you now, Austin? He reached out, his hands gripping my shoulders firmly. What a brave young man you are. Caleb, run along now. Your brother and I need some time alone. Caleb hesitated, looking at me with wide, questioning eyes. I shot him a glance that I hoped conveyed urgency and authority. Go home, Caleb. Now. Reluctantly, Caleb turned and ran off, leaving me alone with the man I feared most. Father Williams steered me into his room, closing the door behind us with a definitive click. I played his game. And I lost. Walking home that evening, the streets of the compound felt suffocating. The houses all looked the same, their pristine exteriors hiding the darkness within. I dragged my feet along the pavement, feeling a hollow ache inside me. No adult believed me. No one would. I was just a kid, powerless to protect myself, let alone my siblings. When I reached our cul-de-sac, I saw my sister sitting on the front porch of our house. It was late, probably around 9 o'clock, but she sat there in the dark, staring into the distance. Her small frame looked so fragile under the dim porch light. I walked up to her, trying to find the right words. "Mary," I said softly, "are you okay?" She didn't look at me. Her voice was flat, almost robotic. "He touched my privates, Austin." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, I walked inside, closed the door to my room, and collapsed onto my bed. That night, I cried harder than I ever had before. The abuse continued for years. It wasn't just us. It was all the kids in the compound. Beatings, exploitation, and humiliation were our reality, while the adults turned a blind eye. Kids and their wild imaginations, they'd say, laughing it off. Father Williams had them all fooled, he was the shepherd, and they were his flock. Years later, one moment stands out vividly. I was 16, on the eve of my 17th birthday. The intercom crackled to life with Father Williams's voice, summoning the entire compound to an emergency meeting at the church. It was unprecedented. Every family gathered, the air thick with confusion and unease. Inside the church, the buzz of nervous chatter filled the air. Armed guards stationed themselves by the doors, their stern faces discouraging anyone from leaving. After a few minutes, the guards closed the doors and stepped out, leaving us locked inside. The room fell silent as Father Williams emerged from his private quarters. He was flanked by 4 guards, 2 on each side, their weapons gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. He climbed the steps to the podium and stood there, surveying his congregation. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice booming with authority, "the day has come. The day foretold in prophecy. The armies of Babylon are upon us, ready to invade our sacred land." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by hushed murmurs. "A Judas has been among us," he continued, his voice rising, "a traitor who has led these armies to our holy sanctuary. But fear not. I will not allow my children to suffer at the hands of these godless tyrants." His words hung heavy in the air as he raised his arms, his face a mask of solemnity. "I have prepared for this day. We will not surrender. We will not allow them to take our innocent, beautiful children. Instead, we will ascend to the true new Canaan, where we will stand in God's kingdom, free from fear and suffering." The congregation sat in stunned silence as women emerged from the kitchen, carrying trays of small paper cups. Each cup contained 2 pills. "Do not be afraid, my children," Father Williams said, his voice softening. "This is not the end. It is the beginning of eternity. I will see you all on the other side." One by one, the cups were passed around, the congregation staring at them with a mix of fear and reverence. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what was about to happen. Women emerged from the kitchen, their faces serene as they carried trays of small paper cups. Each cup contained 2 pills. As they handed them out, a cold silence blanketed the room. "God is ready for us," Father Williams announced, his voice filled with unshakable conviction. "Do not be afraid, my children. I will see you all on the other side." Most of the congregation obeyed without hesitation, taking their pills and encouraging their children to do the same. Parents smiled serenely as they helped their little ones swallow the capsules, oblivious to the horror they were embracing. Others, overcome with panic, tried to flee. Some broke windows, desperately clawing for freedom. The guards reacted swiftly, gunning down the escapees without a second thought. Those who resisted were forced to comply at gunpoint, their cries lost in the chaos. When it was my family's turn, my mother and father sat with unnerving smiles, their faith unwavering. They gently handed the pills to my siblings. Caleb, too young to fully grasp what was happening, simply followed their lead. Mary, despite everything she had endured, still believed in Father Williams. Even as I watched her swallow the pills, my heart broke all over again. When the tray came to me, I fumbled for an excuse. "I need to pray first," I said, my voice trembling. My parents nodded approvingly. "Of course, son. We'll see you on the other side." They smiled as they downed their own pills, their trust in Father Williams unshakable. I knelt on the cold floor, pretending to pray as the horror unfolded around me. One by one, the bodies dropped. People convulsed, foaming at the mouth, their faces frozen in eerie, wide-eyed smiles. My family was no exception. I watched in helpless agony as my mother, father, brother, and sister succumbed to the poison, their bodies contorting before falling still. The church was a scene of pure carnage. Bodies lay scattered everywhere, men, women, and children alike. The guards remained vigilant, shooting anyone who dared to resist or tried to escape. I stayed on my knees, whispering prayers, though I wasn't sure if I was praying to God or to anyone who might hear me. I prayed for my family, for deliverance from this nightmare, for it all to be a bad dream. But deep down, I knew none of those prayers would be answered. When the chaos reached its peak, I made a decision. Lying down among the dead, I stilled my breathing and closed my eyes, pretending to be one of them. The weight of fear was suffocating as I listened to the muffled sounds of helicopters and police sirens drawing nearer. Gunfire erupted outside as the guards clashed with the authorities. Peeking through barely open eyes, I saw the church was now silent, save for the distant gunshots. Father Williams stood at the podium, the sole survivor aside from me. He clutched his Bible, his face calm and resolute. He began walking toward the door but stopped when he noticed me standing up. I locked eyes with him, rage boiling within me. He tilted his head slightly and smiled, his expression calm and mocking. "You had a wonderful family, Austin," he said softly, his tone almost tender. "I'm truly sorry it has to end this way." He placed a hand over his heart, a sick parody of sincerity. "Fuck you," I spat, my voice trembling with fury. "You're the devil." His smile widened. "How wrong you are, sweet Austin," he replied. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You're worse than the devil. You're a pathetic, disgusting excuse for a human being, and you will pay for what you've done." My hands balled into fists as I glared at him, every ounce of hatred I felt pouring into my words. "You raped my sister. You raped me. You killed my family. But mark my words, I'll see you again, and when I do, I'll make sure you feel every ounce of the pain you've caused." The guards burst into the church, their weapons trained on me. I didn't flinch. I looked at Father Williams one last time and uttered the only words I had left. "Fuck you." Then I took the pills. The world started to blur. The sounds of helicopters and sirens grew distant as the darkness closed in. Through the haze, I saw Father Williams open a hidden hatchway near the podium. He descended into the tunnel, laughing hysterically, his eyes locked on mine until the darkness swallowed him. I woke up in a hospital bed 10 months later. The doctors told me I was the only survivor of the mass suicide. They said a SWAT team had stormed the compound, losing several officers in the process before taking down the guards. Father Williams, however, had vanished. He'd escaped through the tunnels, leaving no trace behind. I later learned that he'd done this before, at least 3 times, with other cults. Ours had been the largest. Now, I'm out of the hospital, living under a new name to avoid the relentless media attention. The therapists say I'm coping well, but the truth is, I've become numb. I lost everything, my family, my friends, my childhood. The trauma sits in me like a stone, heavy and unyielding. But I can't dwell on that. I have a mission. This is a message to you, Steve Williams. Or should I say, Eric Bukowski. I know where you are. I've scoured every newspaper and website in America until I found your face, a grainy photo in a small-town paper from El Dorado, Arkansas. You're at it again, preaching your lies to a new congregation, their blind faith reflected in their smiles as they follow you. I'm on my way to you now, Eric. And I swear, in the name of God, I will kill you.